Hi, I'm Congressman Bobby Scott of Virginia's 3rd District, and I serve as the Democratic leader of the House Committee on Education and the Workforce. Thank you for inviting me to speak at this important event. Workers who are looking for higher paying careers and businesses looking for skilled workers should be able to rely on our workforce development system. Unfortunately, decades of chronic disinvestment and lax quality standards in our workforce system have contributed to unsustainable out-of-pocket costs for both workers and employers. Fortunately, this Congress, my colleagues and I have worked to update the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA, which is the backbone of our workforce development system. Our bipartisan bill makes an array of critical improvements to WIOA that will improve the workforce development system for everyone. It will help create a skilled workforce for millions of new jobs created under the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and the CHIPS and Science Act. As we approach the 10th anniversary of WIOA, equipping workers with bold, sustainable paths to economic opportunity is as important as ever. Specifically, this bill would ensure that workers displaced from their jobs can access improved, high-quality training programs through individual training accounts, or ITAs, by guaranteeing that they will receive a training voucher for no less than $5,000. This kind of investment will ensure that displaced workers can pay for job training programs that will lead to high-quality, good-paying careers like welding or nursing, among many others. This bill also creates an emphasis on employer-led initiatives that equip workers with the skill sets they need to fill jobs in critical industries and help currently employed workforce upskill to avoid displacement and advance their careers. Moreover, the bill aims to serve individuals with barriers to employment by codifying reentry programs for justice-involved individuals and boosting summer and year-round employment opportunities for youth who have become disconnected from school and work after the pandemic. And finally, the bill streamlines the eligible training provider list to ensure that programs are aligned with skills and high demands, and that the state and local workforce boards are held accountable for achieving positive outcomes for program participants. In conclusion, when we fully invest in our workforce system, we signal to all workers that they can compete and win in a modern and robust economy. So thank you again for your dedication and leadership. I hope all of you will continue to make your voices heard, and I look forward to continuing to work with my colleagues to ensure that we will do our part to fulfill WIOA's promise for America's workers and employers.
Hi, everyone. I'm Veronica Goodman, Senior Director for Workforce Development and Policy at CAP, and thank you for joining us for WIOA Turns 10, the next decade of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. First, I want to thank Congressman Bobby Scott for those great remarks, and we appreciate his leadership on workforce development and education issues. I'm joined today for a panel discussion by a wonderful group of experts who approach workforce issues from their respective positions and experience. I'll briefly introduce the four of them now, go into a bit of background on WIOA, and then kick off the conversation with some questions. So first up, we have Mina Wu, who serves as the Vice President of Workforce Innovation and Strategic Partnerships at Howard Community College. In this role, she works closely with businesses and industry partners to foster partnerships, provide workforce talent development and training solutions. She spearheaded the creation of non-traditional registered apprenticeship programs at the college in fields like IT, healthcare, education, and business. Mina also oversees the community educational programs, which includes WIOA-funded GED and English as a second language programs, as well as world languages, personal enrichment, 60+ adults with special needs, and youth programs. Next, we have John Trott, who is the Executive Director of the Greater Ohio Workforce Board, supporting 43 member counties. The board oversees the investment of federal workforce dollars in businesses and job seekers. Operating a network of Ohio means job centers in one of the nation's largest workforce regions with an average annual budget of $35 million. He's also a charter member and past president of the Ohio Workforce Association, an organization dedicated to advocating the importance of locally designed and operated workforce programs And John has spent over 30 years working in federal, state, and local workforce programs, including unemployment insurance, Wagner-Pizer, veterans employment, and TANF. And last but not least, we have Jane McDonald, the Senior Advisor to the AFL-CIO Working for America Institute. She has over 40 years of successful experience in the labor movement, as well as workforce development policy and programs. She served as Assistant to the President and Executive Vice President of the AFL-CIO, led workforce policy initiatives for the AFL-CIO, worked for the U.S. Department of Labor ETA, and started her career as Executive Director of the CETA program in Fall River, Massachusetts. So thank you all for making the time today. Before we jump in to the panel discussion, I wanted to briefly introduce WIOA for those tuning in. So 10 years ago, July 2014 to be exact, a comprehensive law supporting workforce development in the United States came into effect. The Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, WIOA, signed into law, is the primary federal legislation that funds and authorizes our nation's workforce development system. It was passed with the goal of better connecting workers with opportunities in the labor market, including workers who face barriers to employment. Now, as WIOA turns 10, discussions among policymakers and advocates on the role of WIOA and our broader workforce development system have intensified. And a reauthorization of WIOA presents policymakers with a crucial opportunity to remake and prepare our federal workforce system for the next decade. From opportunity youth to older workers and everyone in between, generations of Americans should benefit from the education and training programs and opportunities afforded by WIOA. So CAP convened this panel discussion to offer broad perspectives from individuals and organizations that interact with and benefit from WIOA, and to explore ideas for what should come for the next reauthorization. So I've been talking a lot, and I'm most interested in listening and learning from our speakers today. So to start, as a general question, I wanted to ask each of you to consider. So over the past 10 years of WIOA, what has worked well? What do you recommend for the next reauthorization? And Jane, we will start with you.
Thank you, Veronica. Hi, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to be part of this really exciting panel. I'd like to say a little bit about the Working for America Institute. The Working for America Institute is a nonprofit 501c3 that served as the AFL-CIO's National Workforce Intermediary for over 50 years. The Institute's administered multiple U.S. DOL grants and contracts in partnership with employers, unions, joint labor management partnerships, and workforce intermediaries. I know we have not a lot of time, but I really wanted to focus on 5 areas of WIOA that we think are best practices as a way to move forward. And the first is really labor representation. WIOA mandates that at least 20% of the local workforce board must be workforce representatives, including union representatives and joint labor management or union-affiliated apprenticeship programs. And our goals for labor representatives are really to improve accountability, increase performance, job quality, and accountability, make sure these programs are worker-centered, and expand sector-based labor management partnerships. I'd like to cite a kind of an example of a best practice, and that is the California AFL-CIO Workforce and Economic Development Program that provides labor rep training, works with local labor councils to recruit labor leaders and serve on local boards, and really helps build the capacity of labor representatives through training and technical support. We'd very much like to see, and I hope we'll get into this later on in the conversation, labor representation expanded on workforce boards so that it is an equal partner in the WIOA system. The second feature of WIOA is the one-stop delivery system, and certainly from our perspective, the grounding of the Wagner-Pizer Employment Service and one-stop centers is really a central component of states' one-stop delivery systems. And thanks to regulations promulgated by the department, Wagner-Pizer services are being administered by Merit staff, so they can really provide unbiased job matching and job search assistance to individuals. The third is really support for registered apprenticeship. The Institute actually manages registered apprenticeship programs in partnership with labor workforce intermediaries in 5 states to support high-quality labor management approaches to implementing registered apprenticeship. And one really good example is the Pennsylvania AFL-CIO Keystone Development Partnership, which is partnering with the Pennsylvania Apprenticeship and Training Office to implement a registered apprenticeship navigator program, which actually provides apprenticeship to staff, including staff on workforce development boards, to develop and manage apprenticeship programs. The fourth is really the emphasis on industry and sector partnerships. WIOA created industry sector partnerships, and they're really models to advance joint labor management partnerships. We very much want to see labor as a key and required partner of those partnerships. Again, looking at the Keystone Development Partnership, they are the convener and manager of the Northeast Pennsylvania Industry Labor Partnership in Manufacturing. And then layoff aversion and serving dislocated workers. We were very pleased that WIOA continued support for rapid response programs, and they're really critical. As an example, the Massachusetts AFL-CIO Rapid Response Team partners with the State Rapid Response Unit to help unions and companies and workers address downsizing and layoffs. The Minnesota AFL-CIO Training Partnership recently piloted an innovative model where they provided apprenticeship training to workers who were receiving trade adjustment assistance while they continued to be employed at Electrolux. I think moving forward, it's really important that we build on the models in WIOA, but we've got to address the remaining challenges. And from our perspective, they're increasing labor engagement, making sure programs are worker-centered, and that we support labor management partnerships as a key partner in the WIOA system. That was a quick overview. I hope that was helpful, and I look forward to the discussion.
It was. Thank you, Jane. Mina, would you like to jump in next?
Sure. I think I will have more of a practical approach to WIOA. So a little bit about Howard Community College. We are located in Columbia, Maryland, just a little north of Washington, D.C. And we serve about 23,000 students each year between our credit and non-credit programs. I have worked in WIOA Title II programs offering English and GED instruction since about 2000. Directly offering programs for about 17 years and then overseeing it for the past 7. I see the program, so I saw the program through my experience through WIA and the 10 years of WIOA, and now looking forward to the reauthorization of WIOA. I've experienced firsthand the impact of those programs and saw thousands of lives being changed by those programs. So I'll share some of the things that I've observed and worked well from my vantage point. The first thing I want to point out is a single state plan that describes the state's overall strategy for workforce development and local plans that are aligned to the overall strategy based on the regional labor market needs. Those things resulted in a much more coordinated effort between the service providers within the region, as well as create a more consolidated effort to meet state goals. It also required a resource sharing agreement. While the resource sharing agreement was always encouraged and recommended, what we did in Maryland was that it required a resource sharing by all the WIOA partners. And it resulted from us coordinating our efforts much more. It went from, yes, I know the work you're doing in workforce development, all the resource partners, but now I'm invested in the work that you're doing. So it allowed us to communicate more, meet more often, and really get invested in the work that we do. So another thing I'd like to point out is the focus on integrated education and training programs that provides literacy activities along with the workforce preparation and training. So through the integrated education and training programs, we coordinated with other WIOA activities and employers, and we were able to really focus on career pathways. In my past life as a teacher of English as a second language, my goal was to teach English to speakers of other languages, and I thought the students all had the same goal. You know, of course, they were here to learn English. I want them to have perfect English, perfect pronunciation, and all those other things. So we were really focused on that. But a turning point was that students were learning English, but that wasn't their terminal goal. Their goal was to learn English so that they can do what they wanted to do, whether it was access to education or the careers here in the US. So through this integrated education and training programs that we offer, I want to highlight a couple of the programs that we're very proud of. So we had a program called Zap the Gap in coordination with the County Office of Workforce Development and the library to train the limited English proficient individuals for CNA and advanced patient tech programs. And it resulted in a very lovely coordinated program where it started with English as well as CNA and PCT programs, along with resume skills, interview skills, and all of that, and resulted in very high placement rates, with many of them still working in their professions right now. Another program is a skilled immigrant program. We have programs for individuals who come to this country with very high credentials and professional backgrounds, but because of their language and not understanding the workforce landscape of the country, they were doing more manual jobs and were underemployed. So we were able to really take them through the skilled immigrant program to start their career track in their professional areas here in the U.S. So from my vantage point, from Title II program service provider, we feel like the WIOA has done tremendous work in improving the lives of these students and their families. And some of the recommendations that I would like to see is that I would love to continue the systems approach that was implemented through WIOA, and looking at the impact of students and lives holistically as well as individually. I'd like to see an expansion of literacy programs. We're seeing a lot of students at both ends of the spectrum. So we see students who are highly employed, highly educated coming to the United States, but at the same time, we're seeing a lot of students who had interrupted education or even limited literacy in their first language, and they need more time and more instruction at the literacy level, and those fundings sometimes can be very limited. And finally, I would like to see a better infrastructure to do systems work. One of the things I like to say is data sharing. Sometimes we're trying to work as a system and coordinate efforts, but we're not able to share data back and forth. And our students sometimes do not see the impact of us working. So students coming to our doors to the college, they get one experience. And then when they need office help from Office of Workforce Development, they go there and they have to start all over again. And like that for all the different places they have to visit. So it would be really nice if they felt the coordination of efforts that we're trying to do in the back end. And finally, we only see a piece of the puzzle. So, one of the things that we're always asking is, are our students employed at the end? And we don't get to see the whole journey of our students. And it would be great if we were able to see that holistic journey of the people we serve.
Thank you, Mina. That was great. John, do you want to round this out, please?
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for having me. This is a real honor and pleasure. I'm just reflecting on what I heard my colleagues share, and it really has shortened my list of things to share. I think it's very comprehensive. I also have to point out for some of the folks who may be listening to this, that when Veronica introduced Jane, she mentioned that Jane worked in CETA. And for some perspective for folks in some of her impressive experience, CETA preceded WIA, which was preceded by JTPA, which was preceded by CETA. So that is a number of federal workforce programs. So I'm proud to be part of it on such an august board and panel. I want to share with you maybe some tactical things. Running this program with federal dollars from WIOA really puts boards and job centers kind of in the weeds of expending funds, making sure that it's compliant, making sure that the operations of service to workers and businesses go smoothly. And I'll say to you that what struck me most about WIOA, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, was that it really did take the best pieces of the Workforce Investment Act, WIA, and bring them forward into the new legislation, and then make some small tweaks and improvements that we saw were needed after the 15 years that WIA was in place. So it was really unique in that it was federal legislation that, for the most part, kept what worked and made some improvements. And some of those things that were really helpful for us were things that you don't necessarily think about. So 10 years for a federal program is a long time. If you think about what economic shocks might happen in 10 years, the idea of things like a pandemic and how that might transform business and services, and what new barriers might come up for workers who are trying to find work or find a career. Having legislation that maybe anticipates what is what you're unable to anticipate is always really important. So let me just highlight that I thought WIOA took a pretty rigid and structured funding framework. There's really just three major fund sources in WIOA: youth, adult, and dislocated worker. And it allowed us to move funds between those funding sources, primarily adult and dislocated worker. And what does that mean? That means if the economy is going well and there's lots of hiring, that you don't necessarily need a lot of dislocated worker funds, and you can shift those funds into adult to help people get their first work experience, get over some barriers, get into work, and be retained in work. So helping a business and helping a worker stay at the job, anticipating problems. That's a completely different field than if there is, God forbid, a recession. And then it switches to how do we train people and how do we maximize dislocated worker dollars? How do we put people into training and make sure that they can make it through training to make that next career a better job? I really loved that about WIOA, the fact that it allowed us that flexibility and freedom to move the funds where the economy, where the local industries, and where our customers were. The other thing that I thought was really helpful was moving from WIA to WIOA. We were allowed to do a lot more incumbent worker training. That is, working with businesses and workers who are already in place, but helping that business become more competitive and allowing those workers to get more credentials, more earnings, more economic stability. The reason I think that is a good use of federal dollars and public investment of funds is that it helps us stay more competitive. It helps our workers get more credentials and have more stability. But it also does something that's not necessarily apparent, and that is it introduces businesses to federal job training programs. It helps them recognize that it can be very, very valuable to their bottom line. It shows them how important it is to invest in their workforce and how important they are to their ongoing competitiveness. And we often will talk to businesses, find out what their needs are, and there's often barriers to working with the federal job training program, the workforce programs. And this is an easy on-ramp for them to have a good experience with us and then move into them posting their jobs with us and us talking to them about their career pathways and helping them find training providers that will work for them. And then for us, ultimately, we also push to get them into registered apprenticeship. We think this is kind of a spectrum of an easy on-ramp with incumbent worker. Let's push it all the way to where we're getting structure and training around a pathway for all their employees. The other thing that I would say that I would love for any legislation that we would see that would be post-pandemic dealing with our economy, is I really don't believe that we've grappled with how to work with youth the most effective way. We see a lot of youth in high schools. We know that businesses are currently recruiting Gen Z, 18 to 24-year-olds. They're absolutely showing up in the high school, working to recruit folks before they leave. And the funding source, WIOA, does not allow that kind of innovation. It doesn't allow us to do broad services for career planning. It really anticipates when those individuals are either out of school or dropped out of school, and that presents even more burdens for finding those folks afterwards. So I do think that moving forward, the recognition that if we can work with youth as they're interested in work before they've left and picked their career in entrepreneurship, enlisting, higher education or getting a job, that if we could get to them earlier, we're going to make it much more valuable for everybody in the situation. You're going to hear me say this more in some of the future questions, but I do think that being able to convene people locally, like this panel, to work on joint problems, that's another piece that's very nice about WIOA. Having labor on the committee, having community-based organizations, higher education, and then adding in strategy and labor market information is a winning combination. Thanks.
Thank you, John. And thank you for the history on the, iterations of past WIOA, because I think it's important to understand that history and how the federal workforce system has evolved and changed with the times. So, I wanted to sort of take a bit of a step back and just, each of you come to workforce development from different angles. And so I wanted to start, Mina, if you could explain a little bit, about what role community colleges play in our federal workforce system generally, and how they benefit from WIOA. And I think especially, one of the things that we hear a lot at CAP is on how community colleges are, obviously a major training provider, and how when we're envisioning the implementation of the industrial policy of the past couple of years, what sort of an opportunity community colleges have to play in that. So would love your thoughts on that.
Thank you, Veronica. So community colleges play a critical role in federal workforce system and has a potential to play an even more critical role. So if you consider that there are over 1,000 community colleges throughout the country providing easy access to Americans who need education and training, that community colleges have a potential to really make that impact. Community colleges not only serve those coming right out of high schools, but those returning to work, those returning to work, but now with all those people who are trying to come into the educational space, we're now looking at the new opportunity that is required by the workforce of today. So there's our advances in technology that is changing how we work, and everybody needs some sort of reskilling and upskilling, even if they are currently employed. So we are looking at how remote work is changing the skills required to work, and how advances in automation and generative AI will change the nature of work for many. And community colleges are stepping up to provide the skills required and the trainings that are required to meet those community and workforce needs. Another benefit of community colleges is that community is in our name. So we know the residents of the community, the organizations, the employers, the businesses, and we have the ability to tailor and customize education and training to meet those needs of the region. We are the economic engines when tapped in correctly can produce life-changing impacts for the residents and the businesses. So imagine the collective impact of over 1,000 community colleges in the country when we are all impacting our regions in that way, what that could do for the country. So community colleges can serve the entire community, starting with the kids, dual enrollment high school students, individuals who need high school diploma, incarcerated and returning citizens, limited English proficiency students, adult learners, older learners, individuals with different abilities, and the list can go on. So community colleges serve the underrepresented, underserved, income-constrained populations, those in our community with the greatest needs. And I believe that we are only as strong as our weakest ones, and a country cannot excel if we leave anyone behind. It's the community college's mission to serve all students and leave no one behind. So if we bolster the role of community colleges in the federal workforce development system, it's going to be a crucial thing for our country in order for our country to be successful. So in order to do that, I think we really need to codify the community college training grants, implement and expand sectoral training programs that require a systems approach that community colleges can lead. We need to understand that some of our population can be dealing with multiple barriers and possibly even trauma. So providing holistic support and wraparound services so that the whole person can be educated and trained will be important. And I think it's a missed opportunity if we don't leverage the reach that community colleges have in being able to educate and train all ages, all backgrounds, and we'll have the ability to lift everyone up.
Thank you, Mina. Next, turning over to you, Jane. You described a little bit in your introduction about how we can have a worker-centered approach to WIOA and workforce development. That's something that CAP has certainly advocated for. And then often what we hear is, when we hit brass tacks and what does that really look like from an on-the-ground perspective? How do we really involve labor and workers in the decisions that are being made? How do we make sure they have a seat at the table? So if you could share a little bit more about the proposals, that'd be great. Thanks.
Thanks. And, the Working for America Institute just published a brief on advancing partnerships with labor and community colleges that talks about the kind of things that you talked about and some really good models about collaboration. So make sure that you get a copy of that. We've offered many comments and recommendations to the House and Senate and others on WIOA reauthorization. And as Veronica said, our kind of fundamental premise is that workers know their jobs and industries best. They have the knowledge, and through their unions, they need a full seat at the table in terms of governance mechanisms. And I also want to encourage everyone, as we go through this process of WIOA reauthorization, I think it's time to really look at this as a really pivotal moment in workforce development. We have massive investments in infrastructure, semiconductors, clean energy, climate, that are fundamentally changing the landscapes of many communities. We have major commitments to regional, place-based technology and innovation policies. And, as we talked about, rapid technological advancements, the artificial intelligence and automation, they're really reshaping the nature of work systems. And it seems like we should really take a moment to think about a new model of workforce development, certainly from our perspective, that has equal partnerships with unions, both in terms of governance, state and local workforce boards, and in industry sector partnerships as we see those become more institutionalized. And the AFL-CIO has state labor councils and local labor councils in every community. We have affiliates around the country who are eager to become part of the conversation. And so again, our recommendations really do advance full labor partnerships in both the governance mechanisms and the industry sector partnerships. I guess the other thing that, again, by increasing labor engagement in our system, we need to get at the issue of job quality and performance standards. If you look at the results of WIOA, the Harvard Project on the Workforce, the median income is like $29,000 a year for the organizations on the eligible training provider list. 40% of WIOA participants earn less than $25,000 annually. So I think we really have to figure out a way to align workforce development with the good jobs principles around living wages, family sustaining wages, and benefits. Certainly from our perspective, the need to support the free and fair choice to join a union when you're looking at the employer partnerships. Our model is a registered apprenticeship and joint labor management program. We know they're successful. We know that they have good results. There are excellent models out there about bringing, certainly for the building trades, bringing disadvantaged workers into high-quality registered apprenticeships, better alignment with community colleges and career and technical education, and really addressing the consequences of both the federal investments and technology change in the nature of work and the nature for the workplace that workers are going to face. One of the concerns I know we've talked about is the lack of funding. the challenges that were brought up about the underinvestment. And, we've seen actions that are pretty discouraging in terms of proposed appropriations. So we really have to figure out a way to increase investments and to link the federal investments more closely with the WIOA system. We certainly have concerns about proposals to really block grant everything and consolidate funding. Although certainly it seems like there needs to be flexibility, consolidating funding streams really and removing targeting would cause these programs to kind of have to compete with each other for resources. And we really feel that the need to keep funding streams targeted will increase accountability, increase performance, and again, a focus on quality. So we're eager to partner with our partners in the workforce system and community colleges and our employer representatives to really make sure that this system really does fulfill its promise and potential and becomes a center of community and infrastructure engagement because it's more critical than ever. I guess I'd just say one more thing, and that's in regard to youth programs. And I know Representative Scott has really focused on worker protections and safety and health for young workers. There's been some terrible examples in recent years of young workers being hurt or killed on the job through youth apprenticeship and other programs. And I think we have to be very mindful of the need not only to keep strong safety and health standards for all workers, but particularly for vulnerable youth in light of the rollback of child labor protections in a number of states. And I just want to mention that. And again, having robust labor partners can really help mitigate and ensure that safety and health protections are accorded both for adult and young workers. So I hope that was helpful and happy to continue the conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. That was very comprehensive. And I'm glad you bring up the funding concerns, right? Because I think that across the board, when you talk to organizations and individuals in the workforce system, that's like always comes up number one. So it's something we can all agree on. John, I wanted to turn to you because I feel often when sort of we're having these conversations around WIOA, people don't necessarily understand about the role of workforce boards. So, would love to hear sort of just a quick explanation of that. And what role you think they should sort of play in a reauthorization and how that would be helpful.
Great, thank you. Just really enjoying listening to my colleagues share. I do think there's something very good about local convening and strategy and partnering. We don't do anything without our community colleges. In fact, often in most of our areas, we have kind of a triumvirate. We have community college, we have the local economic development or the chamber, and our job center. And they make joint visits to businesses. They do recruitment together. They braid funding. It's absolutely the best way to get things done. And I will say, to build off of what Jane talked about and Mina, WIOA, and maybe some of the folks who might be listening to this may be shocking to them, but WIOA is perfectly suited supporting registered apprenticeships. Absolutely every step of the way. It helps the business, it helps the business recruitment, it helps cover the cost of training, helps that apprentice with tuition, support accounts, equipment, boots, tools. And it also ticks all of the WIOA performance boxes. And so it's just been a fantastic partnership. And I will also say to my colleagues' comments on the board, in terms of board and labor being on the board, I will share with you that our registered apprenticeship program was thought of, set up, fostered by our labor partners. And it was something that our business members on the board absolutely embraced. And so we have our labor experts to thank for the work that we've done in that world. So let me just talk about what's the board and what does it do? And I'll do it as quickly as possible. The nice thing about WIOA, it took a lot of broad workforce partners and made it possible for us to have a smaller group, a more manageable group, instead of 30, 40, or 50 people. but we were able to and required to have business members. That has to be a majority for the board. But then, as Jane had already mentioned, we have labor, we have other workforce partners, we have education, higher education, economic development, TANF, organizations that work with people with disabilities, and then anyone else that you want to add into it. So it gives a lot of flexibility, and it also ensures a broad, diverse group of folks. And those folks who are on that board have to be in a position to make decisions within their organization. So you're assured that whatever direction you're taking, that whatever partnerships that are being put in place, the decision makers are in that room. But having that very diverse group of folks who are making decisions on investments of public funds, which can be a little scary sometimes. You want to make sure that you have a diversity of ideas and that the roles are pretty clear. And I think the very first piece is making sure that you have a diverse group of individuals, care about the community. The second piece, I will say as a word of warning to folks, there's a lot of compliance issues with federal programs. You don't get public money without some guardrails on them for very good reasons. And I think some boards see themselves in a compliance role, which I would discourage anybody from doing. I think it's important, absolutely important, to make sure that funds are being spent in the appropriate way, the way that Congress imagined it. But I think going down the hole of compliance turns everybody off, makes those strategic thinkers into auditors. And I think it misses the role of the board, which is, I think, to set strategic direction. So for instance, I gave the example of our labor members bringing to the board, embracing registered apprenticeships and building out those programs across my region. Absolutely the right approach to take. The other thing that I find with my board that's very helpful is they're a reality check. So they generally don't know what the acronyms are. If you ask them to explain what WIOA stands for, they're not going to be able to do it. If you say TANF to them, they won't know what that stands for, and nor should they. So what they do is they often come in and listen to us talk about running out a workforce program where we're talking about recruiting individuals, overcoming barriers, improving skills, making a connection with business so that people have a good job. And they approach this often, they'll look at me and I know I'm getting off target if they start looking at me like I'm speaking Greek. And to them, that I am, because perhaps I'm talking to them about a program. They're often like, just stop, slow down. What is it you're trying to accomplish? What are the end goals? And is what you're doing make sense? Is there something that an oversight agency is giving you that makes sense? Who can we call about this? It really is a breath of fresh air. The other thing that I think is very helpful when you have a diverse group on your board is that their immediate feedback. Some of them are customers of the systems, certainly our labor partners, certainly our community colleges and higher education, certainly our businesses. These should be our customers, and they need to tell us where we're hitting the mark and where we're falling short. And a good board will do that. Veronica, you want me to talk about what I think should be some improvements in a reauthorization? Perfect. I think with having a board and running it for a number of years and helping them navigate federal rules and regulation and law, I think one thing that is a subtle thing that's important is that I wish that Congress and regulators would approach federal programs and local programs with what, not how. So what are the targets that you would like us to hit? What things are most important? So if industry sector partnerships are important, describe what success looks like. Give us best practices. Do not prescribe that the board set up a special committee for this or for that. I can tell you that getting this group of leaders together on a regular basis, you have to keep them engaged, you have to keep them fresh. You can't inundate them with specifics, the specific rules and red tape, and you can't have them attend 3 or 4 committee meetings in one time. So I think it's really important that targets are set that in general, those views are kept broad and that Congress and our regulators maybe recognize that a small rural board, perhaps in Appalachia, Ohio, has different resources, different partners, different challenges than one 60 miles away that's in somewhat of a metro area with a whole different group of issues, resources, experiences. So something that takes a very singular view for goals and makes it approachable for any organization, for any community, despite what their resources are or aren't. I would also say picking performance measures that are easy to understand and easy to navigate. And I know that's really saying a mouthful right there. I do think in many ways WIOA has picked good performance measures. Did someone get a job? Are they making money? Good money? Are they making more money a year from now? Are they getting a credential that's going to give them economic liberty? They can go and work anywhere in the country, making good money. Are folks serving businesses? Those are good targets. When you get into the details of it, it becomes very esoteric, and I've struggled for the last 10 years to help businesses and board members and community partners understand how the performance measures we're being held to connect to the important strategies that we're approaching. I would also say, I think, to kind of replay on that issue of the what and not the how, setting expectations around things like if industry sectors are important, let's focus on industry sectors. Are there worker groups that we need to be recruiting from? Are there diversity hiring strategies that we should be employing? What recruitment sources should we be tapping into? And maybe switching from a compliance administration to a best practice administration, a performance administration. I'm always encouraged that whenever you put performance information in front of people, they automatically want to do better. I always post all my job centers performance, and I share them with all 43 of them, because I know generally people want to beat their partners, they want to beat their neighbors next door to them, and they want to do better than they did last year. And I think shifting from what did you do wrong last year to here's what the best job centers in the country are doing, where are you and how do we improve your numbers would be a really nice shift. I will also just share with you that I think making sure that membership is flexible, that we can keep a smaller group of individuals so we're not dealing with 30 or 40 or 50 people. And I would also echo my colleagues' discussions about resources. I think having gone through the last 10 years, going through the recession, that we saw funding continue to dry up. We've seen funding that a larger state than my state experiences an economic downturn. Suddenly our funds are disappearing year after year. That having those resources put in place really are necessary if we're going to make the kind of investment that are going to drive.
Thank you, John. So this has been a very thoughtful and considerate conversation. I'd like to open it up to, as you're looking ahead for the next reauthorization, if there's anything else that sort of you wanted to mention or bring to mind. John, you had sort of mentioned the discussion of WIOA has, allowed for more flexibility, which is good because it can be more responsive to changing labor market conditions or the economy. So happy to hear, any other final thoughts folks had.
So
Thanks. Oh, go ahead.
I'll chime in. Maybe two things. So looking at the students that we serve and the clients and the people that we serve, we're seeing that many of them are living very complex lives. And our funding structures are a way where we can only impact one part of that. And we're seeing that it's harder for them to, just because their tuition and fees are covered, or just because they're getting a free training, doesn't mean the rest of their lives are taken care of, and being able to serve the students holistically, whether it be transportation, childcare, stipends, or whatever it may be, so that they can make that next step is very important. It requires all the partners to really braid our funding and work together, but also we have to make it easy for them to access it. If they have to go to 10 different appointments, then they're not going to be able to access that, even if we are braiding funds. So how do we serve the students holistically so that they can reach their goals is number one. And the second thing is really working with our employer partners to rethink their hiring decisions, utilizing things like registered apprenticeship to training their own workforce to earn the skills that they have, and maybe moving away from degrees and looking at competencies and skills in order to be successful. That's rethinking how we hire and train people, but perhaps that's a better way to do so.
Thank you, Mina. Jane, did you want to jump in next?
Sure. Just reiterating our views that the boards themselves need to be more tripartite in terms of labor representation, which we believe would get at certainly a lot of the issues related to job quality and high performance. But kind of looking at what's going on in the Congress and the major investments, both, as I said, around infrastructure, clean energy, and climate, and what's happening on the AI and technology side, we've got to really make sure that there's a focus on the workforce development pieces of that, and really, in some ways, ground the Labor Department programs, particularly WIOA and workforce boards, in that conversation. One other thing that I'd like to mention, we are definitely focused on the reauthorization of trade adjustment assistance for those of you who are on the ground trying to administer programs for trade-impacted workers. It was allowed to expire in 2022, looking at TAA not only as an opportunity to provide resources for workers who have been laid off as a result of trade policy, but there have been proposals in the past, and certainly looking at opportunities to use the trade adjustment model, which is a very robust income support, training, wage insurance, and the like for workers who find themselves displaced, by thinking about trade adjustment assistance in regard to technology and automation and the displacement that will occur as a result of technology and changes in the workplace. We certainly, representing workers who are affected by that technology, we want to see at the table in all those decisions, from design to development to deployment, but we also need to look at the safety net that's afforded to workers who might find themselves displaced as a result of technology. So I just throw that out there because I do think there's a real opportunity for the workforce system in that regard.
Veronica, can I add some comments, please? Thank you. I just want to echo some of the things my colleagues said. I do think things like transportation, housing, childcare are the new emerging barriers, at least in my state. I don't believe that WIOA is well suited for some of those, to come up with some of those solutions, certainly for transportation. So I'm really interested to see how workforce boards across the country start to address housing and transportation. That'd be really exciting to see what innovations come in that area. I will throw out that I think it's important, as Congress considers a reauthorization, to take into account that this business is very relational. We've heard us talk a lot about partners, different organizations, community organizations that make up the system for workforce. Certainly helping to change lives, putting people on trajectories to make family sustaining wages, good jobs. That really requires interpersonal interactions, and it really requires people to build on their relationships. And I think people should, the decision makers, policymakers should be thoughtful about what a redesignation of areas does. I can tell you from those shifts from CETA to JTPA, to WIOA, to WIA, to WIOA, it represents a great deal of uncertainty for organizations who are running these programs. And mixing up those relationships or perhaps putting a structure on over them can be very disruptive in terms of, when I say disruptive, it can take years for new relationships to be put in place, for organizations to go from forming through norming into performing. And I think there needs to be an acknowledgement that local partners usually are together for a reason. They even talk about things like solid waste administration together. You can see the same kind of relationships across all kinds of local, state, and federal programs. And I think having a nod to those relationships will be important. And then I'll also just say one more time that I think funding is really important. I do think in the drafts of legislation, there's a nod towards making sure that there's funding at the state level for innovation, for discretionary spending, and I applaud that. I know our state's been very helpful in building those connections, but I also want to make sure that if we're moving money away from the local communities, is there a way that we can put a floor into that funding so that we can continue to make smart investments for workers and local businesses?
Thank you, John. And thank you all for this incredibly interesting and thoughtful discussion. I want to thank again Congressman Bobby Scott for his remarks. And thank you to everybody who tuned in, and take care.